Hello everybody, it's Peter. Peter with an I, S-T-A-W-A-R-T. Welcome to segment 33 of...
I don't know, the Dark Tower, I guess?
The secretary was saying that when her mother fell and broke her arm, they fed her a bunch of compulsive brand cookies, and she was fine. But boy, once the cookies ran out, she would do anything for more. Anything? Anything.
Yummy!
Are we gonna get through this or what? Asked the dentist, fed up with their tomfoolery. The partners were bored, and the only way to cut the monotony was to pull the dentist's chain. But they knew that enough was enough. Okay, no more. We'll be good. We'll listen, said Colonel Clink with a promising sobriety. I agree, said the other partner. He wet his lips while the dentist took a breath. Let's just cut through this old cheese? He was unable to continue without cracking up, and both the partners laughed and laughed. Cut through the old cheese. The dentist couldn't walk out. It was his office. He couldn't kick them out and have nothing to do with them, or else they would opt to liquidate the clinic and he'd be stuck in court instead of taking patients. Now listen! One more surreptitious comment and that's it! I'm done! No more! He tried to think of a threat, but couldn't think of one. He gave them a hard stare before turning back to the sheets of print. Everyone in the room knew that they had used the last straw, and there was no more funny business. There was a silence before one of the partners asked, "How do you spell surreptitious?" They both chortled, and the dentist threw down his papers and marched out. Surreptitious is indeed difficult to spell, because it's not in the dictionary. Chapter 31. Frank and Joe checked the number above the door before entering. Several of the other tech students were in there, checking the outline for the day's experiment, which was held in the laboratory down the hallway from the classroom. The dentist came in right behind them with a messy stack of papers crammed into his notebook. He would give his kingdom for a good clerk that could keep his things in order. But then he'd have to take it back once everything was all set up nice and neat. He had developed a ringing in his ears from the intense stress and felt like passing out. As you all know, today we're going over acupuncture, said the dentist. Instead of taking pills and medication, disrupting the nerve with a pin is a way of cutting off the pain signals of the overactive nerve pathways. Everything you need to know was in the text, so let's get started using Eddie. Eddie was a life-sized statue covered with little pinholes. The goal was to poke needles in just the right places. Acupuncture is a cure-all in theory, but in practice, it didn't do a great deal because nobody is willing to have it done on them. The dentist had learned a lot of what he knew through apprenticeship, a greatly superior method of teaching in which a master of any particular art or skill teaches an apprentice. When he had a monk teaching him the art of acupuncture years ago, the dentist had complained that he had trouble focusing on his studies because all he could think about were girls. Offered to cure his desire for female companionship by inserting a pin in a nerve ending at a certain point in his body. The dentist was pretty quick to yelp, "Get away from me!" He had always envisioned a pill that would enable people not to think about the opposite sex. A pill that would enable people to concentrate on learning. But such a pill would be extremely difficult to market to kids. Parents who have children attending a pricey college would stockpile it. They would pack these pills between 2 slices of bread, sprinkle it with saltpeter, and serve to their kids to keep them from being distracted. The students were poking pins in all the right places, which meant they did their homework. Joe didn't know how they were doing it. Back in his old school, students sat in class with glazed over looks on their faces while the teacher did all the work. Joe had always thought he was smarter than most other students because he was alert in class and kept his clothes clean and his hair combed. From the way these tech students were working, he started to suspect that other kids at his old school were secretly studying, and they were just pretending not to. Joe started to feel almost claustrophobic when he considered the possibility that other kids had always studied and done all their homework, but have been keeping it a secret as part of a master plan to give him the false impression that he was more intelligent than they were, which gave him a false confidence, thus strangling his incentive to study harder to keep up. It was like secret armies were building around him his whole life. Instead of building up his own army, he laid back, placated by the belief that he would naturally do better than everyone else around him. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, Polly. Is there a way that an appropriate placed needle can stimulate fluida? Asked Polly. The other students, including Frank, listened up. Frank, too, was also adjusting to the shock of having all his false conceptions torn away. He studied for hours upon hours and had read all of the material and thought that he would be the star of the class because he assumed nobody else would read a tenth of it. And yet, all the students had apparently read everything he did. Like Joe, his belief that all the other students blew off their assignments in lieu of going to the movies or having fun out in the sun or cavorting at a frat party were quickly being thrown back in his face. Frank felt disgusted that he wasn't standing above the others. He was beginning to realize they too studied for long hours. The dentist told him that, as far as he knew, the fluida couldn't be manipulated. The idea of fluida was proposed by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck as a way to explain evolution. If a species of animal had a collective desire to change a characteristic of their body, they would pull on that organ on a daily basis, and the pulling motion would stimulate fluida in that section of the body, and it would grow. With Polly, you could probably guess where this question was going. It was suspected that girls had long hair because they combed it so much, and the constant pulling motion would cause their hair to become longer. As for the boys, pulling on different organs doesn't make them longer, no matter how much they try. Trust me, I know. It was thought that giraffes were once a type of horse, but after a terrible epoch, where a vast majority of horses were hung, their necks were pulled enough to activate the fluidas. Is that why Irishmen are hung like horses? Asked Terrence with a wink. Nobody else got his little joke. They had been studying so hard and taking in so many facts that anything said was taken strictly analytically. You mean horses are still hung? Cried Mary, who held an undying interest in veterinary medicine. You know, there might have been some bad apples from Ireland who have done some awful things, but the horses are innocent. They may have bucked a few people in the head, but it's only because they weren't thinking. Terrence would have explained his little joke, but instead decided it would be best to agree wholeheartedly and suggest that they start a flyer campaign to hold a vigil calling for an end to horse hanging. The dentist popped some aspirin for his headache. "Hey there, Doc," said one of the students, holding up one of the long pins. "Why don't you take some of your own medicine?" The dentist knew it would be a great way for the kids to practice not only their textbook skills, but also get an idea of what it was like to work on a real patient, to feel the pressure of having a direct effect on somebody else. In the text, it mentioned how acupuncture could be used to treat headaches. People with intolerable headaches have screws put in their foreheads, 2 of them, right where the devil has its horns. But these head screws are used for people whose headaches are so severe they can't even move,